Hello, I'm Mark Pollitt, and this is going to be a very short video on peer review. It was previously recorded, and you may see some references to WebCT. Just disregard those, and it applies to whatever learning management system that you may be using for your course.
Peer review is where one qualified examiner reviews the work of another qualified examiner before it's released for administrative approval and final release to the contributor. We do it because it is a very effective quality control. It allows us to verify that each and every examination that's peer reviewed, and my recommendation is that all of them be peer reviewed, although in some instances some organizations have chosen to only review a certain percentage. I recommend reviewing all of them. It allows each and every exam that's peer reviewed to be verified as meeting the organization's standards. It also provides for direct and indirect continuous improvement. And what I mean by that is that the direct continuous improvement is the peer reviewer looks at it and makes suggestions to the examiner, both formally and informally, suggesting ways in which they might improve their performance. That acts as a way of improving their knowledge and their ability. But at the same time, the reviewing examiner has the opportunity to see how other people do things and how they approach problems. And very often you'll read someone's report and look at their notes and go, hey, that's really neat. That's kind of cool how they did that. And you put that in your bag of tricks. And so it is, in effect, a forced extension of your information to your peers. And those things have a way of replicating across the organization. From a management perspective, it's really important because it gives you an extra set of eyes and ears. When an organization grows and the volume of work becomes fairly large, managers have to budget their time. And they don't have the ability to look in great detail, and quite frankly, they don't have the psychic energy to put into a close scrutiny of every report. And what peer reviews do allows them to have somebody that really is closer to the problem anyway to look at it, and to look at it in a little bit more detail. Again, it also acts as a formal and informal exchange of information within the organization, and it provides vicarious experience for the reviewing examiner. It also provides the organization an opportunity to look at itself on an ongoing basis rather than just at accreditation audits and that sort of thing. From an individual perspective, you're probably asking, what's in it for me? In the end, I view it as self-preservation. Before I send that thing out the door, I want somebody else to look at that and say, you know what, Pollitt, you got it right. Or, you know, you really messed up here. Or, you know, you didn't answer the question. I would much rather one of my friends tell me that I'm stupid than get up on the stand and find out that I missed something important or I misstated something. It happens all too frequently, and to me this is the easiest and best way and the least painful way to find out when I'm doing something right and doing something wrong. How's it really look in the real world? Well, there's an awful lot of organizations that don't do any peer review, and that is both unfortunate and probably is going to be an issue down the road because that clearly isn't best practice. But other organizations have decided to do it on every single case. Others have decided to do it on a sampling basis. There are legitimate management reasons why you might want to go that route. But in the end, every organization needs to have a particular program. They need to define a precise way of doing peer reviews, or it's not worth doing. Just doing a peer review however you feel each time you do it doesn't really help improve the quality of your product, and really isn't serving the protection needs of the examiner that you're reviewing. What you really need to do is have a set of instructions, such as we're doing in this video, and actually talk about what it is that you want done and how you want it to do it. And I strongly recommend that you utilize a form to do that, and that form can be updated on a frequent basis as needed. You need to make sure, as you're designing your form and designing your peer review process, that you take into account all of the existing policies and practices and procedures that you have in place. Because what you don't want is to have something go out the door that hasn't been measured against something that you say that you're already doing. So you want to make sure that you're checking off all those blocks of the things that you have already in paper as part of your policies, that this is how we're going to do things and this is what we're going to do. So you want to make sure that you're documenting your compliance with these things as part of your peer review process. Again, I strongly encourage the use of a form, and in fact, in this course, we're going to use our own form. The peer review is really designed to answer a number of questions. The first one is, did we satisfy the contributor's request? They sent us this to look at, did we answer his question, or is his question answerable? The second part is, did we approach this examination appropriately? Appropriately is a little bit tricky. It's tricky because every examination has a different fact pattern and has a different investigative situation, but at the same time, the way we do our examination has to relate to what the tasking is and what the investigative goals are. We're going to talk a lot more about that when we talk about examination design and planning. But understand that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and we're not suggesting that every examination has to be done in exactly the same order. But the question is, was it done in a fashion that was appropriate to the situation? A very critical scientific question is, can the results be reproduced? Is this something that we can, in fact, reproduce? And if we see results and we don't see the methodology that allows us to see how those were produced, then it's probably not a very good examination. Does the documented process and data support the conclusions and opinions? And this is really important. When you look at the examination report, you realize that each of the sections, starting at the very top, when you're looking at the tasking, from that point on, every section depends on the answer to the prior question. The forensic questions have to answer the questions raised in the tasking. The steps taken have to address how we're doing the examination to answer the forensic questions. The conclusions have to be supported by the data obtained in the results section. And the results section, of course, has to track with what you said that you did as your steps taken. And last but not least, your conclusions and opinions have to be based solely on the facts that you've developed and documented in your results section. So each one of those sections depends on the previous one. And so one of the key questions in a peer review is, did you in fact support each of these at each of these levels so that it supports the one above it? And last but not least is what's kind of called the 50,000-foot view. Will this examination stand on its own? Can somebody who doesn't know anything about the case or the examination take this and say, okay, I know what was asked for, I know what was done, and I know what the answer is? So those are some fundamental questions about the peer review. As a peer reviewer, the question that you have to ask yourself is, would I be comfortable going on the stand testifying about what I'm peer reviewing? If the answer is, I'm not sure or no, then you need to find out why the answer is I'm not sure or flat no, and get back with the examiner and get that fixed. Because if you wouldn't be comfortable going out the door with it, then that person probably shouldn't be comfortable going out the door with it. And by the way, it's not unheard of for examiners to die or to be indisposed or to leave the employment, and another examiner ends up being asked to testify about an examination. The policy that I used to have is that the person that would have to testify about the examination was the person that did the peer review. You will find in WebCT a format for the peer review. And the very top of it is pretty self-explanatory. It'll have the name of it and the revision date. And you put down the date that you're doing the peer review. Next down is the examiner name, and that's who did the examination. The peer reviewer obviously is the name of the person doing the peer review. The laboratory number, put whatever it is that the report says it is, so that the label on the laboratory number is the same as the identification of the laboratory on the laboratory result, or on the laboratory report, I should say. Next, we get into the blocks, and by the way, it should be pretty obvious these blocks may not be big enough to answer all the questions, and so what I would ask you to do is to then add additional sheets and label them according to what the item is, and then you can extend your comments for each item there. The items should be fairly self-explanatory. I'm going to go through them here in just a minute. The middle column is yes, no, or conditional. And what that means is if you put yes, then the report is fine as it is. If it's no, obviously there's a problem and you have to put something in the comments. Conditional means, yeah, it's okay, but it could be improved by doing something else. And again, you need to put comments in there. The items themselves are in logical format. The first one is the report in approved format, yes or no? Did they use the right form? Did they put the right things in the right blocks? And this is where you check that out. And this is where you're going to evaluate whether the person put the right things in the right blocks. Does the tasking completely and accurately reflect the exam request? This is where you need to look at the examination request. And by the way, when you do the peer review, you have to look at both the report and the notes. So you should have in the notes, associated with the notes, the actual request. And so you need to look at the request and look at the tasking and say, okay, does the tasking answer the question in the examination request? Then you go down one more notch and you say, are the forensic questions, which we're using in this training environment, is not something that you're normally going to see in the real world, but I find it a very useful tool for teaching. Are the forensic questions appropriate to the tasking? Basically, do we understand what the real questions are here, and have we correctly enumerated them? Then we go down and look at the steps taken. Are the steps taken clear, appropriately detailed, and sufficient? And what we mean by that is that, as I mentioned in the reporting video, we're not looking for a verbatim transcript of your examiner notes. We're looking for the general steps and the general outcomes, and we are looking for all the documentation in there that is going to result in something in your results section. So you need to be able to write a précis, if you will, of the steps taken in a way that a non-technical audience will be able to understand with a minimal amount of explanation by the examiner. But are they sufficiently detailed, and do they contain enough data that will support your results? The next one down, is there a disposition of the evidence documented in the steps taken? One of the last steps that you should take in any examination is to do something with the original evidence. In some cases, it may be a matter of, was returned to the evidence room? In some cases, it will be returned to the contributor. In some cases, it will be destroyed. Whatever it is, you need to put that in there so that people know where to find that evidence after you're done with the examination. You may have an internal policy that tells you where to do those things, but I encourage you to put it into your report because otherwise you're going to get on the stand someday and you're going to say, they're going to say, what did you do with the evidence? And you're going to be able to say, well, I always put it back in the evidence room. And they're going to say, how do you know that you put it back in the evidence room? Well, because that's what I always do. That's okay, but it's a lot better if you write it in your notes, return to the evidence room, and it's in your report and the steps taken. When I was done with this, I returned it to the evidence room. Whatever it is that you do, put it in there. Next block down are the detailed results attached and marked as appendices. If it's a short answer, a short amount of data, then you can put it in the results part, the results block. But if it's printouts of dozens of files or a number of files, then you probably want to put them as appendices. And you can say in the results, 26 Word files were identified and printed out as appendices 1 through 26. Typically, we see that a lot with pictures. And it's handy to do it that way because, for instance, in the case of pictures, you may not want to print them out on regular paper. You may want to actually use photo paper or something like that. Appendices are good. You just need to refer to the appendices in your results. And I would provide enough information so that when they look at the appendices, they know what they're looking at. The next step down are the conclusions clearly derived and supported by the results? If it's not in the results, you can't draw a conclusion. Now, conversely, if it's not in the steps taken, you can't have results for it. So you got to make sure that you have the steps taken that produce the results, and then what the results are themselves, and then you can draw your conclusion and explain what your conclusion is. And this particular block is asking, are the conclusions clearly derived and supported by the results? And if you can't look at it clearly and see that, then it probably needs either rewording or reworking or reorganization in some fashion. We get down to opinions. Are any opinions supported by the results and conclusions documented in the body of the report? You basically have to have the information that you're going to rely on in your opinions documented in the body, whether it's in the results or in the conclusions. And last, are all the steps taken and results documented in the examiner notes? If it's in the report and it's not in the examiner notes, that's a problem. Now, not all notes are going to end up in the steps taken or the results, and that's okay. I generally recommend that you look at the notes first. Go down through the notes and then read the report. And if you're reading the report and you see something that you don't remember seeing in the notes, go back and take a look at the notes and see if it's there. And if it's not, then that's a flag. Conversely, make sure that you can go back and find all the results documented in the notes that are in the results section. It's a lot of verbiage, but in the end, you're reading it basically for, am I comfortable with this? Would I be willing to answer the questions, any questions that might be raised about this report? You need to be very confident in your review. And in this course, anything that you do not catch in your review, you will be penalized for. So the examiner will get penalized for errors, but the peer review person will also get penalized for those same errors unless they're documented in the peer review. I do that because I want you to look at it very, very critically, and I want you to develop the ability to respond to your peers and help your peers do the right things. In the real world, that's really important. You cannot put, your good relations with your friend above protecting them on the stand. Remember, you're protecting them. In this case, you're protecting yourself, and in so doing, you're protecting your classmate. In the real world, what will typically happen is you'll go over to the examiner that you're doing the peer review and go, hey Sally, hey George, how about this and this and this? And very often they will fix it and give it back to you, which is okay. In other organizations, they do it blindly. They do the peer review, they give it to the supervisor, who then can either decide to return it or to sign it off on the administrative review. In this particular class, what you're going to do is you're going to receive via email an examination to peer review. You are going to upload your peer review in WebCT in the assignments bin. And if you choose to, you can email a copy to the examiner that you reviewed. It's your option. I would suggest that it would be good of you to do that. Once again, you need to take this seriously because the reviewer will be penalized for any errors on the original examination that you did not document in your peer review. I realize that's very harsh, but welcome to the real world. As always, I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope this video was useful for you. And until next time, have a good week.